Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now, sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. I always tell audiences that magic is about attention. You can't vanish an object, you can only make people look someplace else. The night the ship changed, I learned attention can also save your life. My name is Miguel De la Cruz, 32, Manila-born, second-generation stage magician. I travel with a carbon fiber briefcase full of decks and gimmicks, a folding top hat as old as my career, and a short list of shipboard technicians who know where I hide smoke-free flash paper. On the Celestia of the Caribbean, a floating city with more than 4,500 passengers and 1,500 crew, I was the second billing act in the Grand Theater. Post-dinner slot, family-friendly, no open flames. The theater seated nearly 2,000, red velvet and gold trim, a chandelier shaped like a radiant compass rose. You could stand on that stage and feel the breath of 2,000 people as a tide. The first sign of trouble looked like plain stage fright. From the third row, a gentleman in a linen suit slumped sideways, his head on his wife's shoulder. I raised a hand and paused, the spotlight a warm sun on my face. People chuckled, thinking it was part of the act, until the woman whispered sharply for help. House staff moved. I signaled the sound booth to bump up the house lights and brought the microphone down to my chest. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice calm by reflex, "let's give the crew a bit of space." Two ushers and the ship's nurse slipped through the row with the soft efficiency I'd seen in dozens of cruises. We expect heart flutters, blood sugar dips, minor scares after big dinners. The nurse reached the gentleman, and he twitched, a rigid wave running through him. Another in the fifth row slid down, heels catching on the seat ahead. Someone called out from the balcony. I heard my stage manager over the intercom, "Medical on the way." Then sound fractured. A man near the aisle stood up too fast, toppled into his row, and knocked over a tray of themed mocktails. The nurse leaned into the first gentleman, then jerked back as he snapped forward, teeth clacking audibly, not biting, more like he'd tried to shout and the muscle around his jaw refused to listen. His hands clawed at the nurse's sleeve. The woman in linen screamed. I have done escape acts in handcuffs underwater. I have done card storms in gusts from a misfiring air curtain. None of that prepared me for the sound of 2,000 people inhaling at once. The microphone fed back. I killed it by habit, slid it into my coat, and walked forward into the light, one hand up. "Please, everyone remain seated. Security is..." That's when three more in different sections began to seize. One collapsed across the aisle, blocking the way, as the audience realization moved through the seats like wind through tall grass. Panic is movement without attention. People stood, leaning into each other, a chain of elbows and knees, and the aisles clogged. I saw the cruise doctor, a tall Brit named Hargreaves, come in with a med bag. He knelt. The gentleman in linen rotated on the seat, eyes open but unseeing, and made a low, steady sound like someone trying to hum around a locked jaw. When the doctor touched him, the gentleman's arms whipped up and held, not a flailing seizure now, something fixed and insistent. Hargreaves tried to pry him loose, and the gentleman suddenly surged with a strength that made no sense for his age, forcing Hargreaves back into the row. I backed away as two security officers reached the row and pulled. The gentleman fell into the aisle and didn't stop. He didn't see the chairs, the people. He pushed and pressed with a mindless urgency, mouth opening, breath whistling. Somewhere in the balcony a woman shouted that her husband was changing, and the shout cracked into fear. A child cried. Above us, the chandelier glittered like a patient eye. "Deck crew, close house doors." My stage manager snapped into my ear, voice tight. "Migs, backstage, now." I looked for the woman in linen. She was gone, lost in shuffling legs. The security officers lifted the gentleman, one at each arm, boots sliding on the carpet. He writhed, then went strangely limp, all tone gone, and one of the officers toppled with him. I reached the trap door behind the side curtain, slid into the narrow stair, and hauled it down as two more audience members buckled near the orchestra pit. Glass broke. The house went from controlled worry to a storm. Backstage smelled like dust and machine oil, that clean metal scent of rigging and fly lines. I ran past coiled cables toward stage right, where the gray door led to the safety of crew space. The backstage hands were already moving. My stage manager, Sierra, waved a flashlight. "Go," she said, making a pushing motion. "Go, go." A thud came from the door we'd just sealed. The lock rattled. "They're pushing," a handrigger said, staring wide. "We never think of an audience as a force that could break a theater, but 2,000 bodies, scared, can become a current that moves walls." We slipped into the service corridor, the I-95, that long, bright artery that ran the length of the ship behind the scenes. The door shut. The sudden cleanness of the corridor, stainless steel and white vinyl and fluorescent hum, felt obscene after the plush theater. A housekeeping cart teetered, half full of towels. Two crews sprinted past with radio chatter hot in their hands. "What is it?" I asked, breath fogging. "Food poisoning? Carbon monoxide?" "Medical is saying unknown," Sarah said, matching my pace. "Security is locking passenger decks. We need to get to Muster B and help. Go left." The ship's public areas were stacked like a resort mall. Atriums, buffets, bars. Crew space was all utility. Labeled doors, fire stations, diagrams of watertight doors and escape routes. I pushed open a crew door into a vertical stair trunk and we climbed, 3 decks up. The ship moved underfoot on a gentle swell. Through a small porthole the sea looked normal, black with a silver plane under the moon. We came out near the aft galley. The air smelled like roast meat and cleaning chemicals. The galley had gone quiet in the sudden way a kitchen does when the power flickers. Kenji Sato, a Japanese sous chef I knew from late-night noodles, looked up from a cutting board. He held a chef's knife in one hand, blade clean, eyes between fear and focus. "Migs," he said, "what happened?" "Medical emergency in the theater," I said. Behind me, another door banged open. A line of restaurant staff hurried in with trays and panic. Chief Steward Rami Hassan, tall and precise, took one look at us and drew us to the wall. "Stay, listen." His voice had a ballast you could believe in. "There are reports of aggressive behavior. Security is attempting lockdown. We will get guests to muster stations, but some are saying to remain in cabins. The passengers won't hear both messages clearly," Sarah said. "They never do," Rami replied dryly, then glanced at Kenji's knife. "Let's keep the kitchen tools for kitchen work." We all looked at the door as a man stumbled through. A busser in a white jacket, breathing fast. He slammed the bolt across. "They're running out of the buffet," he said. "Just running. People are falling." "Water," Rami said, and handed him a sealed bottle. He took one gulp, then looked at us and shook his head. "They don't look like themselves." It's hard to share precise detail by word of mouth. You say they don't look like themselves, and everyone fills it with their own nightmare. My brain supplied fever eyes, heat stroke, panic. It did not supply what we saw 10 minutes later. We were headed toward the aft stair to go topside when the alarm sounded. A ship-wide tone followed by a calm recorded voice instructing guests to proceed to muster stations with their life jackets and medication. The message repeated in several languages, a mechanical prayer. I felt something loosen. Order, however shaky. Then a different tone blared, a sharper one, and the corridor speakers switched to the captain. All guests and crew, please remain in your cabins and crew quarters. Do not proceed to muster. Repeat, do not proceed to muster. We stopped. Conflicting messages are glue on the souls of people trying to move. Rami swore softly in Arabic and keyed his radio. Hotel Control, this is Chief Steward Hassan. Which instruction should I enforce? The reply came staticky. Bridge says hold everyone in place until security clears decks 5 through 7. Medical is overwhelmed. Some crew are unresponsive. Unresponsive, another gentle C word that covers a cliff. We did what ship people always do. We worked. Sarah headed to the entertainment office to check on our dancers. I followed Rami into the I-95 with Kenji at my shoulder. We moved toward the midship elevators to block guests if they came pouring out. They'll jam the lifts, Rami said. Stairs only. We keep quiet. Loud noise is already drawing people to accident sites. We don't need crowding. The ship's hum faltered. A brownout shiver. Refrigeration compressors stuttered. The overhead lights held steady, then dimmed, then came back. Someone cheered, small and lonely. We reached a door marked Crew Only, Service Stair. Rami cracked it open and peered into the public corridor. It looked like a set change in a show. Buffet lines half abandoned, plates sliding slowly toward the edges of tables. A stroller left akimbo. An older man in shorts leaned against the wall, head down, breathing hard. I started toward him, but Rami shot a hand back. Stay. The man lifted his head. His skin had gone a shade I've only seen on late-night ferry rides when someone is truly unwell. Pale under tan, with a slight dusting of gray. His lower lip hung, and his fingers flexed and held like he was testing a modified grip. He didn't look at us or past us so much as through us, like he was trying to find a sound he could follow. Behind him, down the corridor, someone was sobbing near the frozen yogurt machines. "Sir," Rami called in his steady voice, "please remain where you are. Help is coming." The man took a step, then another. His upper body leaned forward in a way that looked painful, like his balance point had moved and his joints hadn't gotten the memo. He was not running. He was focused, the way a sleepwalker can be focused. He closed half the distance before Rami fully opened the door. Kenji instinctively put his knife behind his leg, out of sight, not threatening. I wanted to perform a trick, produce a silk scarf, distract him, be the magician and not the man. I did nothing. The man reoriented toward a sound behind us, an ice machine clicking in the crew hallway. He adjusted and moved toward it instead, as if some part of his brain that used to rank inputs by meaning now ranked only by volume and rhythm. His fingers brushed the stair rail, then skittered up it as if he'd remembered stairs as an idea without remembering his knees. He lifted a foot, planted it, swayed, and then pressed on toward the mechanical whir. A woman in a sundress rounded the corner behind him, saw us, saw him, and put her hand over her mouth to hold in a cry. He turned towards that sound like a compass seeking north. "We can't let noise draw a group," Rami murmured. He closed the door quietly, and the three of us took in the simple math of a ship. Sound travels. If many in that altered state were following sound, the ship's normal wedding party volume would be a beacon. We needed quiet routes, insulated paths. That's when Sarah called. "Miggs, the dancers are in the rehearsal hall. 2 of them. Something's wrong. We've locked the door, but I hear people outside. We need to move them." The captain's last broadcast he cut off mid-sentence. "Where are you?" I asked. "Deck 3, aft. The service lift is dead." Kenji steadied his knife hand. "We go." We cut through the galley, where the comm had cracked. A fire alarm chirped from a stovetop someone hadn't cleared. A line cook stood in a corner, eyes unfixed, moving his jaw like he was chewing a memory. Two others guided him gently into a cold prep room and shut the door. Kenji grabbed a belt of paring knives and slid them one by one into his apron loops. Not because he wanted to use them, because people behave better when they feel they can act. The rehearsal hall sat behind the theater, a high room with mirrors and a sprung floor. We found it with the door barricaded by a piano dolly. Sarah's voice came through the crack. "It's us," I said. The dolly rolled back, the door popped, and the smell hit me. Sweat, fear, and the sharp tang of disinfectant we used to clean jazz shoe scuffs off the floor. Elena Morales, our lead dancer, sat on a chair with an ankle wrapped in an ace bandage. She was Cuban, a born fixer, the one who always found the lost hairpin or the missing buckle. She smiled when she saw me and then didn't. "It's worse than we thought," she said, looking past me. "They're listening to us breathe." Two dancers lay on yoga mats, eyes open, chests rising evenly. Sarah knelt between them with a first aid kit, her hands hovering, ready to help, afraid to touch. "They went quiet," she said. "Then they tried to rise," she added carefully. "Not sit, rise," like something in their spine was pulling instead of their stomach muscles. Elena put her hand on mine. The pressure steadied me. "We need to move before someone hears us. I can walk if I lean on you." "Where?" Rami asked. "Hotel stores," Elena said at once. "Food, water, first aid, crew cots, and doors that lock." Rami nodded, already mapping routes. Service corridor to the laundry, cut to the crew mess, then stores. We keep to the I-95. We don't try passenger decks unless we must. We made a stretcher from a rolled marley floor and two batons. The dancers on the mats, Lena and Paolo, looked like they'd fallen asleep listening to a metronome only they could hear. We lifted Lena first. She was warm, not feverish, but her muscles had an odd tone, like she was doing a plank without moving. Her eyes tracked the fluorescent housings. When Paolo heard her being moved, his head rotated a few degrees toward the sound. We opened the door into the corridor. It was empty, bright, and humming. Halfway to the laundry, we heard footsteps from across corridor and froze. They were slow, soft, and many. Kenji shifted his grip on a kitchen knife. I took a heavy flashlight from the wall box, the kind with a wide, magnetized base. Rami signaled us into a cleaning closet, slid the door shut, and snapped off the light. In the dark, we heard them pass. Soft shoe sounds and the faint swish of clothing. No chatter, no coughs. The group moved with an arrowless momentum, like tidewater sneaking around a sandbar. One of them bumped a bucket and stopped dead to reorient to the slosh and rattle. We stayed silent as if silence were pressure, and after 20 seconds the footsteps drifted on. We made it to hotel stores without seeing anyone else. Rami knew the keypad, and we were inside. Metal shelving with labeled bins, cases of water, pallets of shelf-stable meals, wrapped linens, boxes of facial tissue. We set Lena and Paolo on crew cots and closed the bolt. Elena inhaled and exhaled with deliberate quiet. "We can last here a while," she said, looking at the inventory with a choreographer's efficiency. "We can ration." "We'll need more than rationing," Rami said. He pointed at a laminated emergency plan on the wall. "If engines fail and we drift, we must send a distress signal, attempt to anchor, or prepare to transfer to tenders. The bridge will know, but the radio calls are not being answered." "How do you know?" I asked. He pulled a handheld set from his sleeve. "Because I've been calling." He clicked. "Hotel stores to bridge." A hiss came back, empty and endless. "Hotel stores to security control." The same. "GMDSS, EPIRB, SART," Kenji said, naming the electronic lifelines with a cook's clipped cadence, like ingredients. It will have something. We spent 2 hours learning to breathe without making noise. We explored with a map and memory. The ship took on a night personality, every clank a question. Power steadied. Then it dipped again, and the emergency lighting strips along the floors glowed a cool blue. The air felt a little warmer, HVAC cutting back. We ate quietly from a sleeve of crackers. Sarah and I checked the door every 10 minutes like a ritual. At some point, Rami said, "We need to think long. Food, water, restrooms, places with doors that hold, but also control. We cannot stay in the storeroom forever." Elena nodded, ankle elevated. "We need the galley organized and the crew mess safe. We need to find families with children. We need to figure out what draws those who've changed and what repels them." "Noise draws," Kenji said. "Light draws, sometimes." "I think pattern draws," I said, surprising myself. "Metronomes? Fans? Anything steady?" Sarah listened to the silence and said, "Then we can use that." We moved in small teams. The first target was the galley. If we controlled food, we could trade for cooperation and peace. The main galley straddled the midship area. Banks of ovens, tilting skillets, industrial mixers bolted to the floor, knife racks in shadow. We approached through a pot room, mops inverted like reeds. In the galley proper, a group of crew had already barricaded the serving line with bread carts. At their center, a former police officer, later I learned he was a retired NYPD sergeant named Diaz, had organized a perimeter. He lifted a hand. "You with Rami?" he asked. I nodded. "Good, we keep it calm. No shouting, no banging. We feed quietly, we move quietly, we keep families in the crew mess and the forward lounge." "Any word from the bridge?" I asked. Diaz tilted his head. "They sealed it. That's what a deckhand told me before he ran." He didn't say from what. We coordinated. Storekeepers inventoried shelf-stable goods with handheld scanners. Cooks like Kenji planned meals that required no vent hoods at first, no fans to draw attention. We decided on cold food for now. We filled jugs. We made a list of medicines and the first aid kits and what to fetch from the medical center if it was reachable. We'd been talking 15 minutes when a bang sounded from the aft corridor. Several heads snapped. "Hold," Diaz said softly. The bang came again, rhythmic. "That's a service door," Kenji whispered. Rami pointed to 2 security officers and they moved to the corner and peered around, silent as cats. What came through the door was not a rush. It was a pressurized leak. 3 crew in stained whites pushed into the galley like a wave that had forgotten it was water. Their eyes tracked the strip of emergency light at the floor, not the people. One put a hand flat on a stainless table and pressed, body following. Another bumped the cart and corrected toward the wheel squeak. Diaz's officers shifted to block, hands out, not wanting to hurt colleagues who might still be reachable. One of the changed crew pressed a palm to an officer's chest and leaned like he wanted to step into the heartbeat. "Noise off," Diaz murmured, and someone in the pot room reached up and killed the noisy fan. The 3 paused, adrift without a beacon. One cocked his head, hearing a drip across the room. We waited. A room of statues that could breathe. When the trio turned toward the drip and began moving away from the cluster of us, I extended my hand with a reflex as automatic as any forceps grip. I fluttered a silk scarf from between my fingers, and the blue square lifted in the still air like a signal. The nearest pair of eyes tracked it. The second moved to follow the first. The third, a fraction slower, oriented to the movement sound of the scarf on air, the faintest whisper. I walked backward, slowly, 6 steps, leading them toward the dishwashing area where Rami had just signaled a steward to open and then close a heavy door. The trio drifted through like smoke through a grate. The door sealed. The room exhaled. The metal hummed with our gratitude. "We can do this," Sarah said quietly. "We can shepherd." The standoff came 2 hours later when passengers began arriving. Word had spread that food and safety were in the crew mess, and a group pushed into the galley perimeter with hungry fear. Diaz stood with his palms up. "We feed everyone," he said, "but we do it quietly and in turns. No one barges." A man with a crew's casual polo and a silver watch, the kind of watch that keeps appointment with itself, stepped forward. "I'm taking my family in," he said in a voice that expected compliance. Behind him, 2 teenagers and a woman clasping a travel purse. Rami stepped alongside Diaz. "Sir, we must control flow to keep everyone safe. Please wait, and we will—" "What's safe is you getting out of the way." The air shifted. If you've worked on ships long enough, you can smell the minute before something breaks. It smells like hot rubber and old money. I took a step between the 2 groups and raised both hands. "Sir," I said, my voice show calm, "your family will eat in the next group. Please let us serve the elderly first, then families with small children. We will then—" A scream cut him off. It wasn't a violent scream. It was alarm, brittle and high. One of the teenagers had seen movement behind a steel shelf. The changed trio we had penned earlier were searching for a new sound to follow. The drip had stopped. Their hands were flat on the porthole window at eye level, a harmless gesture turned eerie by intentless persistence. And the teen scream drew them like iron to a magnet, and they pressed at the glass. Everyone took one involuntary step back. Diaz moved in that strange, slow way trained people move when they want to speed the room while keeping their own rhythm low. "Quiet," he said, and because he said it like gravity, some of us obeyed. The man in the silver watch did not. He pushed, and Rami caught his arm. Not rough, just firm. The man swung his free hand, not a punch, a shove that caught on a piece of Diaz's belt and snagged. The little clink of metal on metal sounded like a triangle in an orchestra pit. All 3 behind the glass turned their heads toward it at the same time. "Stop," Elena said from behind me, voice barely above breath, and the word carried with an authority I'd only heard on dance floors. The man looked ashamed, then angry at being ashamed, and stepped back. He put his palm over his watch face like he could cover the sound. "We fed the elderly and the families with infants first. We learned a rhythm. Open the lines, close them, keep voices low. If someone began to cry loudly, we guided them into a small housekeeping closet with a crew member who knew lullabies in 3 languages. People listened because they could feel that listening was a form of rescue. The ship itself, though, was not listening. Power flickered again. The big show lounge lights went dark and stayed. Somewhere forward, a generator took on a laboring tone. The official term is loss of propulsion. To the feet, it feels like a long breath held too long. A purser came running with news that the engine control room had lost contact with the bridge. The captain's voice did not return. "The ship will drift," Rami said, looking at a wall chart that showed us, in cheery colors, always somewhere in the Caribbean Sea. "We may have to anchor to control swing. That requires the bridge." "Or steer," Kenji said simply. The word hung. To reach the bridge, we'd need to cross public decks and climb. Reports said those who had changed clustered where the noise had been loudest earlier. The buffet, the pool deck, the atrium with its live music. By now, many were in cabins too, drawn by televisions left on. The path along the outer promenade might be quieter if we could avoid glass doors that chimed when opened. We'd need to cut door alarms. We'd need pass cards and codes. We had those in the safe in security control, if security control was reachable. Diaz and Rami drew a map on butcher paper with grease pencil. Elena leaned in, ankle-iced under a towel, and marked a string of crew doors most guests never see. Sarah listed who would go. A team of 6, Diaz and one of his officers, Rami and me, Kenji and Elena if she could manage. The rest would stay to keep the galley working and guide passengers to quiet, defensible spaces. We distributed radios and agreed on hand signals for when radios would betray us. Before we left, I took pause by the dancers we'd laid on cots. Lena's eyes tracked my moving hand again, then veered toward the steady spin of the ceiling fan we had mistakenly left on low. I reached up and clicked it off. Her eyes drifted, unmoored. I wanted to touch her hand and couldn't. We stepped into the I-95 and felt the ship's breath go shallow. Emergency lighting lit the floor edges, throwing our shadows long and thin. At a fire locker, Diaz opened the steel door and handed out equipment. A fire axe for him, a pry bar for his officer, a carbon dioxide extinguisher that could be a blinding, chilling barrier if needed. For me, he raised an eyebrow. "You're a magician." "I can be a distraction," I said. I slipped 2 stainless whisks into my coat pockets, sound makers when spun, and a handful of flash paper that smoked without flame, just enough to shift attention. Kenji kept his knives, wrapped and sheathed. He looked like a small kitchen with legs. We took the aft stair tower up one deck, then another. At the landing to deck 7, we heard a murmur. Not voices, a sound like wind around statues. The door to the public corridor was propped open by a room service cart tipped on its side. Diaz crouched, peered, held up 2 fingers, too visible. He eased the cart back up, then let it drop deliberately. The clatter rang. In the quiet after, he flung a tea towel down the opposite hall. Both figures, once a man in a golf shirt and a woman in a sundress, turned toward the towel's soft slap and drifted after it. We slid the door shut and breathed. The forward promenade was our goal, a path outside along the lifeboat deck, usually closed at night. We pushed through the crew-only exit onto the open air. The sea smelled clean. The moon shone on the white of lifeboat hulls stacked like sleeping whales. The tender davits arched, quiet and competent. The path ahead was blessedly empty, and the railings were cool under my palm. We passed a lifeboat with its painter line half uncoiled, a scar where someone had tried to launch it and failed. Another boat hung lower than it should, one cable spooled wrong on its drum, a task aborted mid-panic. A third was gone, leaving an empty cradle and a smear of scuffed paint down the hall where it had swung. The gulf below was dark. Far off, lightning flickered on a horizon unseen. We reached the forward stair. The door to the bridge access corridor was jammed half open by a discarded luggage trolley. Diaz shifted it with a grunt, and it squealed. We froze. From the direction of the theater, now dark and cavernous, came a slow tide of footsteps. Not running, coming. Kenji gestured left toward an alternate crew passage. Rami shook his head. That one pinched to nothing. We were already committed. "Attention," Sarah whispered in my ear over the radio, her voice steady because she knew mine would break if hers did. "It's all attention." I took a whisk from my pocket and spun it. The wires sang a faint, precise tone. The approaching feet oriented, then slowed, confused by a sound with no clear position. I spun the second whisk in the other hand and stepped backward in front of a wide glass wall that showed the Black Sea. The feet followed me like a sleepwalker follows a lullaby. I kept my steps large but quiet, drawing them past the bridge corridor choke point and toward the empty space by the bow elevators. When they were far enough from the others, Diaz slammed the bridge corridor door and engaged the manual drop bar. The clang made the group near me shift, and I knew if they found me there I would not be quick enough. I flung a square of flash paper high. It burst into a smoke puff that made no pop, just a hiss. Their heads turned up, eyes on the drifting remnant, and I slid sideways into a service pantry and shut the door. I could hear my own breathing, loud enough to draw the whole ship if the door hadn't been thick. We climbed the last stair in a column. The bridge door was locked from inside. Good procedure if a threat is reported. Diaz produced a master keycard. The reader blinked red, then green. The door clicked. He pushed. It didn't move. He leaned. "Something is against it," he mouthed. Kenji and I put our shoulders to the metal. It gave an inch, then two. A damp resistance slid along the floor, and the door opened far enough to admit Diaz's officer, small and wiry. She squeezed through and then pulled from inside with quiet effort. We entered the bridge. It smelled like ozone and salt and a whisper of antiseptic. The ECDS screens, electronic charts, glowed with the outline of our route and a logic white line veering into a gray field marked "No charted depths." Someone had dragged a rolling chair in front of the door as a barricade. It skated on a sticky patch of spilled coffee. Two officers lay by the forward windows in a posture of deep rest, faces to the deck, hands open, as if they'd knelt and then melted. I won't tell you they were gone. I will say that when we moved one gently to turn him, he made a low sound and reached, not for us, but for the tiny vibration of the compass repeater on the bulkhead. His fingers trembled around the humming casing like it was home. Diaz's officer crossed to the helm console. "Manual," she whispered, and toggled a control that shifted the ship's steering from autopilot to hand. The wheel responded with a soft servo whir. The engines were not answering. Propulsion remained at zero, but with the thrusters we could at least change heading if power blinked back. "GMDSS," Rami said, already at the radio console. He thumbed the digital selective calling panel that could send an automatic distress. The small screen blinked. TX failed. He opened the cover over the emergency transmit to activate the EPIRB, the small buoy that, if released, would announce us to satellites. The bracket was still intact. He pressed the handheld VHF to his mouth. "Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. Passenger vessel Celestia adrift. Unable to control. Unknown medical event. Position." He read the coordinates off ECDIS. "We need assistance with evacuation and medical." He released the button. The radio hissed the same long ocean hiss we'd heard all night. "SATCOM is probably congested or offline," Diaz's officer said. "We may get them when we clear weather." "We are not in heavy weather," Rami said. "Up there," she said quietly, pointing at the sky beyond the bridge windows, where a streak of very high cloud glowed, raked in one direction. "Weather far away can kill radios here." Kenji looked to the engine status display, a sad Christmas tree of alarms with their sounds muted. "Cooling alarms, then power save," he murmured. "Someone put the engines to safe because no one was there to watch," he added, as if the ship itself had protected its heart when people could not. We did what we came to do. We set a heading. The island we'd glimpsed at dawn, its outline a dent in the horizon, lay 40 nautical miles west. A small anchor icon on the chart gave it a name, Cayo Esperanza, a private resort island used for daytime excursions. With no propulsion, we could not make way, but we could angle our drift and be ready. The bow thrusters coughed, caught, and died. We looked at each other with the same expression people wear when the last flashlight battery flickers. "Then we wait for main power," Diaz said, "and we hold the bridge." We built the bridge into a place that could be lived in. We closed the curtains over the side windows to reduce reflections that might draw attention from the changed if any found their way outside. We laid anti-slip mats near the door. We placed a ring of quiet objects people could hold to steady their breath. Rope coils, a thick rubber wheel chock, a wool blanket. At dawn, power returned like a patient waking. The hum rose. The engines did not, but auxiliary power steadied. The air cooled. Coffee machines somewhere deep in the hotel side revived and produced their first hopeful drip. The EC disc showed our drift. I eased the helm left and felt the bow thrusters answer weakly, enough to bring our nose a degree toward the island. "Good," Rami said. "We make small good." In the early light, I saw the ocean for what it had been all along, indifferent and honest. The ship was the strange thing, a city stacked above water. In that honesty, I found a piece of calm I hadn't expected. We could plan in daylight. The plan had 3 lines: hold the galley and crew mess as a quiet refuge, maintain the bridge as command, and prepare the tender launch if propulsion failed to return. The tenders, the enclosed lifeboats that doubled as excursion boats, required power for their davits, but they also had manual cranks and hydraulic bypasses if we had strong arms and patience. We selected the 2 tenders best placed for a quiet drop, far from the pool deck where the changed clustered around the big video screen now playing a loop of the company's promotional reel with house music mercifully muted. The journey from the bridge down to the tender deck felt longer than the one up. We carried toolkits, a manual on the hydraulic system, and a belief that, while we could not control the world, we could turn a wheel. On deck 4, we found passengers accreting on the quiet carpet like islands. We moved past, eyes level, voices low, offering a hand here, a nod there. People seem to draw strength from a person who looks like they know what to do. Illusion, too, can save lives. At Tender Station 3, the panel lit. Low power, but enough. Diaz assigned positions. Kenji took the control lever, his short, competent fingers steady. Elena limped to the boat's door and checked the latch like a dancer checking a prop door before a performance. Tap, lift, settle. Rami coordinated with the steward who had quietly, efficiently shepherded 20 people to the shadow under the davit, away from the sight lines of the pool deck. The first tender lowered. Steel cables unspooled with the long sigh of a giant letting go. I watched the orange hull slide past the windows, reflecting that pearl dawn light. Halfway down, a small squeal started on the starboard drum, a sound like an ungreased swing. The change on the pool deck shifted at once, heads turning, and began to move. Not a stampede, a tide. They came to the rail, hands on metal, leaning into the squeal as if it were a lullaby. "Grease," Kenji whispered, reading the system like a recipe. I grabbed a grease gun from the locker, popped the cap, and Rami and I leaned out onto the platform to smear the squeal into silence. The changed watched with their soft intent. The tender kissed the water. We loaded it quietly. Families first, then the elderly, then single travelers who had stood back out of courtesy and now didn't know how to step forward. The boat's coxswain seat sat empty. Diaz looked at me. "You're about to become a pilot," he said. "I can steer a boat," I said, thinking of Manila Bay rentals. "I can follow a heading." "You'll follow the quietest heading," he said, and placed his big hand on my shoulder with an old cop's blessing. I climbed into the tender. The interior smelled like warm plastic and hope. I strapped in and felt the small diesel at my back, ready. The water below was a surface, not a substance. I looked up at the ship's height and realized how far we'd climbed in the last 12 hours, not just decks, but understanding. The plan was to stage one tender near the ship, harbor it under the lee away from the pool deck sightlines, and use it as a shuttle if we could not get the big lifeboats working later. We'd position it behind a gentle angle of the hull, where even the curious would have trouble seeing. I eased the boat off the falls and into a slow hover. The engine tone was a soft purr. Above, the changed leaned at the rail, then lost interest when the squeal stopped. They turned toward the repeating sound of the ship's digital map in the atrium, a tiny beep that confirmed a touch panel's press. Elena came down in the second tender, a light in her eyes I hadn't seen since last season's premiere. She kept her weight on her good ankle and scanned for small things people needed. A child's hat, a bottle of water, a hand. By midday, we had 2 tenders staged and a corridor established. A quiet route from the galley to the tender deck through linen rooms and service stairs that smelled of bleach and courage. We moved people in 1s and 2s, no lines, no chatter. We used the magician's trick, the stagger. 1 person passes invisible, 10 become a parade. On the bridge, we checked our drift. The island rose in the windshield. A low ribbon of green with a pale beach. Closer, we saw smoke. Not from village cook fires. From something larger. A shore facility, a fuel tank, or just a bonfire built by people signaling the oldest signal in the world. We are here. Decision, Rami said. If we go to the island, we must commit. The ship cannot. The tenders can. We will not find a hospital there, Diaz's officer said. We might find quiet ground and rainwater collection. Elena looked out at the green thread like a dancer studying the stage she would soon stand on. We might find people. We loaded the first tender with the very young and the very old, with parents and their children and 3 crew who knew engines better than I did. We left behind a triangle of capability. Diaz and his officer on the ship with a handful of strong backs, Rami to keep the galley and stores in order, Sarah to hold the entertainment team together with tape and bonds you can't see. I eased the throttle and felt the tender come alive. The ship, our great city, fell behind in 40 foot that felt like a lifetime. The island grew. In the midway, a school of flying fish leaped off our bow, glittering. The sea had forgotten us in an hour. We were a new thing, making a new wake. As we approached the beach, we saw figures on the sand, some waving, some standing still as statues in the sun. We slowed. The standing still ones were spaced evenly, facing a low building where a generator thumped. The waving ones were not evenly anything. They were human relief, messy and real. We beached the tender on a shallow slope, popped the bow door, and people walked into the warm water and onto the sand as if into a film they had watched their whole lives. I stepped down last, the bow door at a ramp under my feet. The wave returned and ran up my shins, then receded, leaving salt on my skin and a cool that said, "Attention, you are alive." A man in a resort polo with tired eyes met us with a clipboard that was more talisman than tool. "We've kept a quiet zone," he said, pointing to a shaded field where volunteers had hung sheets as partitions. "We turned off the resort music on day 1 when we realized drew them," he added, nodding toward the evenly spaced figures by the generator. "We daisy-chained the power to the desalinizer and kept 1 small AC for the medical tent so the fans wouldn't make too much sound. They stand there by the hum, and they don't come closer." He didn't say who they were. He didn't have to. One of the evenly spaced figures turned its head a few degrees towards our engine, then away again when Kenji cut the motor. We were learning the dance of this new world. Sound poles, quiet shelters. We made a plan to shuttle until dusk. Radios crackled, ours to the ship, the resorts to their spread of volunteers. We spoke in phrases that never used the words that invited panic. We said quiet route and family first, and no need to rush. We said, we have you. You don't lie on a ship, not about things that matter, but you can choose the words that hold people upright a little longer. On the last run of the day, I steered the tender back toward the Celestia. She sat on the sea like a cathedral, tall and precise. Her windows caught the late light so they looked lit even when they weren't. Smoke rose from the island in a skinny, disciplined line, Someone down there had learned to make it that way to be seen without making the whole sky shout. On the bridge, Diaz's officer raised binoculars and then lowered them when she saw us wave. The deck below the pool looked calmer. No clusters at the rail, fewer figures drifting. The atrium screen finally went black. Someone had pulled its fuse, or Mercy had. I felt a swell under the hull and softened the throttle. The tender slid into the lee. As we took on the last group of the day, crew who had decided to stay on the island to help build shelters, and 2 who wanted to return to the ship because it felt like home, Elena touched my shoulder. "You pulled an audience tonight," she said and smiled. "You made them look where they needed to look." "I had help," I said, glancing at the crew and passengers who had become something more. A company. The island shore glowed with the last of the sun, that golden hour cinematographers chase. For a moment, the sea sounded like it always had, a hush and a whisper and a breath. Then, far inland, a siren that the resort maintenance team had forgotten to disable whooped once and died, cut by a hand that now understood attention. On the beach, the standing figures reoriented to the fading whoop, then stood still again, facing the generator's steady purr like sunflowers to the light. We would go back and forth again at first light. We would dig latrine pits downwind. We would set up a tarped line to catch dew at night. We would send a team to the island radio tower and try high frequencies at dawn and dusk. We would keep people fed with what we brought and what we could catch. We would decide which ship systems to salvage while the Celestia drifted in sight like a promise we might yet keep. We had not saved everyone. We had not solved whatever had moved through our ship and through us. But we had learned something true. Attention is life. If we could keep our attention on the small, quiet things, the sound of water in a barrel, the scratch of pencil on a roster, the sigh of a sleeping child, we could walk through this new world without inviting the wrong eyes. That night, under a sky so clean it looked drawn, I sat on the sand with Elena, ankle wrapped and propped on a rolled towel. Kenji brought us cups of broth made from a concentrate he'd smuggled from the galley, and the steam smelled like every crew midwatch I'd ever had. Rami wrote on the clipboard clean lines that became a plan. Diaz and his officer took the first watch, silhouettes against starlight, as steady as bollards. "I have a closing monologue in my act," I told Elena, entranced by the rhythm of tiny waves. "I say that the real magic is that we pay attention together, to the same thing at the same time, and for a moment the world is lighter." "That's still true," she said. "Now the show is different." Out on the black water, the Celestia turned 1 slow degree, her bow acknowledging the island like a queen nodding to a village. Beyond her, the horizon held the faintest orange smear where the mainland might be. There were trails of smoke there too, and the suggestion of fires not yet out. We would go there when we could. For now, we would build something quiet that held. When I finally lay down on the sand under a mosquito net that smelled faintly of laundry soap and adventure, I didn't sleep. I listened to the generator hum, to the soft feet of volunteers circling the tents, to the patient breath of hundreds of people trying in unison not to wake the ones who would wake at any sound. I thought of the Grand Theater, of the moment when 2,000 people had breathed in together. I imagined them breathing out together now, scattered across ship and shore, learning a world where even a whisper mattered. We had a heading. The island burned only a little. The sea accepted everything without judgment. I held the idea like I'd hold a card between 2 fingers, steady, invisible to anyone not looking for it. I would make people look in the right places. I would keep the attention where it saved us, and when the sun rose, we would begin again. learning a world where even a whisper mattered. We had a heading. The island burned only a little. The sea accepted everything without judgment. I held the idea like I'd hold a card between two fingers, steady, invisible to anyone not looking for it. I would make people look in the right places. I would keep the attention where it saved us, and when the sun rose, we would begin again. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.